Thanks, Bhaskar. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. So as Bhaskar said, today I'm going to be talking about how to take your copy editing to the next level when you're editing your proposal, and how to really make sure that we're not only meeting compliance, but we're also hitting compelling and responsive content. So thank you for the introduction. As Bhaskar said, I do have a background in government contracting as well as proposal management and development. And I do have my PMP and my APMP certification. So that is how I've entered into the proposal world. And I've always been very strongly involved, especially in editing and making sure that editing cycles are effective and efficient. So one of the best ways to do that is to think of your proposal as building blocks. So the first step is always going to be compliance. So in any proposal, because that is what you need to be evaluated by the government. But the important part is to go beyond that compliance and build in responsive content and then weave in compelling content to that responsiveness. So by thinking of our proposals in these building block ways, we can get to higher evaluated content in our proposals. So we're going to start off a little bit. I'm just going to talk about these stages of the proposal building block process and how they relate to each other. So compliance is always going to be our baseline of our proposal. So what does compliance mean? Compliance means that your proposal is strictly conforming to the instructions, the evaluation criteria, and the work requirements stated in the solicitation. So making sure that you know either the section L or the instructions to offers, depending on the format of your solicitation, that section M, evaluation criteria, and your section C, or work statement or performance work statement. This is important because if your proposal is non-compliant, it won't get evaluated, right? The customer can just completely throw it out, and you won't even be in the running for an award. So we always want to make sure that we are meeting compliance just so we can get our foot in the door, at least to be evaluated. The best way to achieve this is to fully read every single part of your solicitation and make sure you understand it. And as you're reading through and going through the documents to develop this understanding, make sure you're building out a compliance matrix. And then once you have that compliance matrix, follow it during every step of the review phase. So conduct a standalone compliance review during every review phase, just to make sure that you're always going back to that compliance baseline and that you're still meeting all of those requirements. So responsive is where we take it a step further. So now we have checked the box on compliance. We're meeting all of the requirements that the government has stated that they want us to meet in our solicitation. But responsiveness means that we are now also meeting those implicit requirements that might not be directly called out in the solicitation. So this is addressing the customer's underlying needs and concerns. This is important to your proposal because this is what's going to show the customer that you have a more in-depth understanding of their environment, their goals, their needs, what keeps them up at night, right? The best way to achieve responsiveness is to practice good capture techniques. So responsiveness is always going to be something that starts at your capture, and you want to make sure that you're carrying that information through. So you should know a little bit about your customer, you should know about the work being performed, and you should know about the environment that you're going into. And that is the information that you're going to use in order to weave responsive content into your compliant proposal. Another thing when you're weaving this responsiveness in is to identify gaps. So if you have a compliant proposal, but you're not sure what that extra step is that you need to take to be responsive, that's where you can research. So go out, find background information on your customer, look up their previous contracts, look up the work environment, become more familiar so that you can add that responsiveness into your proposal. Another really good way to gather information for responsiveness is to ask strategic questions during a Q&A phase of your proposal. So if there's something that you're not sure about, or if there is an aspect of your technical approach that you think you could tailor better, you can always ask a strategic question to try and eke out what the customer really cares about when it comes down to that requirement. And that will allow you to build on that answer and develop a more responsive content in your proposal. So once we're addressing our compliance and our responsiveness, now is when we come to being compelling. So compelling is what wins your proposals. So convincing the customer that you are the best choice to perform the work based on your company's knowledge and expertise. This is important because all of your competitors' proposals are going to be compliant, right? Because if they're not compliant, they won't be evaluated for the most part. And most of them will also probably be responsive because a lot of other people going after the work will also probably have experience either with the customer or they'll have familiarity with the work. So there's a chance they'll be responsive as well. So compelling is really what you're trying to get that is going to push you above and beyond when it comes to the evaluation criteria of your proposal. So the best way to achieve compelling content in your proposal is always ensuring that your strategic messaging within your approach ties your win themes to the customer needs. So you should be developing those win themes at the beginning of your proposal development cycle, and then don't just leave them on the table. Make sure you're taking those win themes with you through every single step. So if you're developing new content, address that win theme. If you're reviewing old contents, still use those win themes, make sure that you're still hitting those win themes and checking those boxes. Also making sure that you're weaving your strengths and benefits through your approach. So a lot of times people will get into the habit of really getting into details in your approach and you're talking about how great you're going to do this thing, but you don't necessarily highlight the strength of your company when it comes to the technical aspect. So always make sure that you're still incorporating those strengths and benefits whenever you're talking about your approach. And then adding proof points that highlight previous successes of exceeding customer expectations, either in similar work or a similar customer. So in order to win evaluations, compliance alone does not make you competitive, right? Because every proposal that completes the evaluation is going to be compliant, or else it'll likely be discarded, because that's the easiest way for your customer to lighten their workload of how many proposals they have to review. So the best way that you want to boost your evaluation is to think about the customer and think about your approach and how you can strengthen your narrative on those two subjects. So what keeps the customer up at night and how can your approach fix those issues for them? That's where you're going to start getting into that responsive content. And then what about your approach makes you the best choice? And what are your company's discriminators? That's where you're going to get that compelling part to add into your narrative. Another important thing to remember when you're developing this content is, in some cases, evaluators may be bound to only evaluate what is on the page. So even if you know that the customer knows something and they know that you know something, don't just assume that you're going to be evaluated for that knowledge. Always make sure that you're including every aspect of your approach or every aspect of the response to your solicitation on the page, because just because it's common knowledge doesn't necessarily mean it'll be evaluated if you don't touch on it in your proposal. So for example, say we're given the requirement that a contractor shall provide transition services to complete transition within 3 months. Pretty standard transition. The government or the customer is not specifying any milestones. They're not telling us exactly what kind of transition tasks they want us to do. They just say we want it done in 3 months. So it's up to us as the competitors that are going after this to convince the customer that we are now the best option to complete these transition services. So if we were just writing a compliant, good question, Nicole. We actually are going to talk about ghosting a little bit later. So yes, you read my mind. So if we're just being compliant, we're just responding to the requirement itself, right? So our company will transition the project work within 3 months. That's it. We've done what they asked for, right? But every company that goes after this is going to be able to say they're going to transition it within 3 months because that's the expectation. We want to make sure that we're going above and beyond that. So now if we're being responsive, say we know this customer and we know that they have a high op tempo, and so one of their concerns is continuity of operations, and we want to make sure that we're telling them that we're going to address that concern. So our responsive content might say that customer will receive continuity of services throughout the transition period, driven by our transition manager, will provide weekly transition reports, and ensure incumbent knowledge transfer. So now we're telling them we're going to meet your requirement, but we're also going to make sure that we're addressing these underlying concerns that you may have. So, but in other cases, we might have a lot of competitors that are familiar with this customer and that have experience working in this environment. So now we have to make sure that we are also the best choice and that we are exceeding these expectations. So to be compelling, we want to give them their continuity of services. We're giving them a dedicated transition manager, weekly transition reports, and we're also ensuring smooth staffing transitions, and we are going to exceed their expectations by achieving transition within 2 months of award. So now we are giving them everything they asked for, we're giving them what they care about, and we're also exceeding their expectations through our expertise. So in order to apply these tools to content that is already developed, you can still use these same methods to add value during your review cycles and during your editing cycles. So compliance is always our baseline. So the first step is always to check the boxes. Ideally, you will have developed a compliance matrix, and so you'll use this compliance matrix to always, at each phase of your review, make sure you're meeting all of those requirements still. Ensure the easiest way to do this is once you've developed your compliance matrix, make sure that your headings are going to match the headings in your outline. So over here, we're breaking it down by our heading matches our section L and section M, or our instructions and our evaluation criteria. And then we're just going to make it easy on ourselves and cross-check that throughout our outline and make sure that we're hitting all of the requirements. Another really easy thing for people to miss, or that is easily overlooked, that is really important to compliance, is always make sure you're double checking your formatting instructions. Especially if you're in a document, day in, day out, you're looking at it continuously, it can be very easy to develop format blindness. So always make sure at the beginning of every review cycle, you're just going back and double checking those formatting instructions, making sure, your graphics and tables are all the right size, your, fonts are all still according to the requirements, your page sizes. It can just be something that's very easy to not think about as often because it's not what the customer is really asking you to talk about, but it is important still to the compliance of the proposal. So the best way to make sure that your editing stays focused on being responsive and compelling is to not edit in a vacuum. So this is especially important for people who are pulled into a review process who might not be involved in the entire proposal. You might be, tapped on the shoulder, hey, we need an extra couple people to read through this for a red team. And in that case, it can be very easy for people to fall into the trap of reading the requirements, reading the section they've been asked to read, and then just doing a good compliance review, checking the boxes on compliance, but not actually making sure that the proposal is doing what we need it to do in terms of responsive and compelling content. So the easiest way to make sure you're not falling into this trap is don't edit in a vacuum. Know your win themes, your strengths, your features and benefits. Have all of that information with you whenever you go into a review cycle. Be prepared to apply that information as you're going through. Does this approach sound good? But does it also meet what we are trying to convey to our customer? Also ensure that your messaging is consistent between all of your proposal sections. So this is important for a lot of proposals where you have teams that have multiple authors that might be working on different sections. Always make sure that you have a reviewer that's looking at multiple different sections to compare those for consistency as well. Another really important thing, especially when it comes to compelling content, is to consult debrief comments from previous edit cycles. So if you had a pink team where you gathered, 200 comments and you maybe addressed 75 of them, now as a reviewer going into red team, I'm going to want to look back and see what came out of that pink team debrief so that I'm not either spending time addressing the same comments or that I can make sure that we have addressed the comments that we needed to coming out of that previous review cycle. And then another really important thing, especially when it comes to responsiveness, is showing the customer that you've paid attention. So if you have bid on previous solicitation or previous work with a customer and they gave you debriefs from previous proposals, whether they win or lose, make sure you're always looking at those customer debriefs from those previous proposals so that you're not either repeating the same mistakes that they gave you feedback on before, or if they really liked something, making sure that you are incorporating that into your proposal, because that's going to show that you are paying attention to what the customer is telling you, and that's going to give them that extra level of responsiveness in your solicitation response. So another really important thing, especially when it comes to proposals that have smaller page counts, which we all know are always super annoying to deal with, is making each sentence count. So especially if you have a very highly technical proposal and not a lot of space to work with, you want to make sure that every single sentence in that proposal is providing value. So whether that value is in terms of compliance, meeting, checking a box, or if it's being responsive, responding to a customer concern, or if it's being compelling, selling your company as the best choice, every single sentence should add one of those values to your proposal, because if it's not serving you. It's not going to give the evaluator anything to grade you on when it comes to rating your proposal. So when it comes to this, you should be reading each sentence in terms of its evaluation potential and impact. So if you read a sentence as a reviewer and you can't figure out where it ties to a requirement or what it has to do with the customer or how it sells your company very well, then it's not a very impactful sentence. So it should probably be noted to either be rewritten, maybe removed if it's not adding any value, if it's not touching on any requirements or approach themes, and use that space to put something stronger into your narrative. And so when it comes to those compliant, responsive, compelling building blocks, you can apply those at the most granular level possible. So maybe you start with a sentence and, like we did in our example, build out on that sentence until it's compelling. Or maybe it's at a paragraph level and you start with a compliant paragraph and you build into that paragraph until you've also met responsive and met compelling. So always do that at whatever granularity is possible during your review cycle, and make sure that you are getting as much bang for your buck into your content. And then don't waste page space on fluff. So this is a little bit what we talked about. If it doesn't add compliance or address customer concerns or highlight how great your company is at doing it, take it out, because it's not doing you any good and the evaluator isn't going to be able to use it to give you a higher rating on your proposal. So we talked about checking for consistency. So this is very important because especially on documents where you have multiple people working on it, it can be very easy to not go back and cross-check between your sections, especially if each section on its own looks really, really good. We might be tempted to say, okay, well, the whole thing is good, but we want to make sure that we are providing a consistent template for our evaluators when they are giving us our ratings as well, because they are not as familiar with the document. So when it comes to checking for consistency, something that's really important is verifying that your metrics and data are remaining the same across your sections. So you don't want to say in one section that you've maintained 98% staffing, and then later down in the document, you pulled an old metric and now you're only at 90% staffing. Because as an evaluator, I'm going to know, well, do they know what their staffing is or not, right? So always make sure that you're verifying your data and metrics. And the easiest way to do this is to add them into your wall of truth. So your wall of truth should always be used and provided to your entire proposal team in order to create a baseline for everyone. So what are we using for our terminology? Are we saying project manager? Are we saying program manager? Which one are we using the acronym PM for? And then any tools or processes should always be called the same thing throughout your proposal, especially if you have a proprietary tool for your company or a process. Pick a name that you want to call that thing and stick with it throughout the proposal. That's going to be the easiest way to tie those consistencies between the sections. And then towards the end of your review cycles, either in red or maybe gold team even, have one person, either one of your more experienced editors or maybe your proposal manager, depending on your team outlook, to one voice your proposal, to read through the whole thing and ensure that the writing styles all match, that it reads consistently as if one person were to have written the document. And then also make sure on proposals where you have multiple volumes that you're retaining consistency across volumes. So for example, in our pricing document, do we have a staffing labor matrix that matches what we talked about in our management and staffing labor matrix breakdown in our technical volume? So ensuring those parts are consistent as well. So another thing when it comes to boosting your evaluation is to make sure you're not using words that aren't serving a purpose, right? So we are catering to our evaluators. We're showing the government that we know who they are and we're meeting them on their level. So they're not all necessarily going to be scholars. So just because they're a bigger word doesn't necessarily mean it's a better word. Another important thing when it comes to being responsive is use terminology that your customer is going to be familiar with. So whether that's industry standard terminology, if it's customer specific terminology, use words that the evaluator is going to be able to relate to you on in your proposal. And then just a note about acronyms, you want to make sure that you are only using the term once. If you're not using an acronym again, there's no reason to introduce it. Acronyms serve a purpose of reducing the amount of space we have to use on repeating words. So if we're only saying the word once, it doesn't need an acronym introduced. Let's see, question. Let's see. So there's a question. Let's assume you're working with the team and are facilitating the red team review. Do you communicate with the team the how-tos or best practices via email, or do you hold a 30-minute class and take reviewers through the process? So this is a good question, and I've actually done it both ways. It really depends on how familiar you think your reviewers are, whether they've worked on proposals before. If you are working with a group that has done multiple proposals and they kind of know the deal, an email saying, hey, these are the expectations, these are what we want to focus on, links to the documents and due dates is totally acceptable. If you're working with a group where maybe you have a lot more technical SMEs that are not as familiar with the proposal world, but they have more of that knowledge of their approach, I would say it'd be worth it to have a kickoff meeting and really go over exactly what you're expecting of them and giving them some more cohesive guidelines, and also being available to answer any questions right there on the spot before they begin their review. And that way, A, they feel prepared to give you a good review, and B, you're not scrambling to answer a bunch of last minute questions the day before the review is done of all of your SME reviewers who are now trying to figure out how to do a review. So thank you, Rita. Good question. So relating to your customer, so similar to using industry standard language, make sure you're also using language from the solicitation document. If the customer calls it something, you call it that same thing. Don't go off the rails and start making up your own terminology. Even if that's something your company uses, always make sure the customer is familiar with the language you're using. If there's any terminology in the solicitation you're not aware of or that you're unfamiliar with, use the Q&A in order to clarify what that means so you can better relate your approach to the work, because the last thing you want to do is respond to something that you don't know what it is. And then another really important thing is to use customer-focused language and sentence structure wherever possible. So customer first is always the best approach when it comes to developing responsive content. So what does the customer care about? And then how do we address this concern and what makes us the best? So for example, instead of saying that you provide customizable web portals, that's talking about us, what we are doing as the competitor, right? but the customer wants to know what they're getting out of it, because at the end of the day, they're the ones paying for the work. They want to know what their benefit is, right? So instead, we're going to say that the customer's need for efficient project scheduling is enabled through our customized user-friendly dashboard. And then we're going to give them a metric, and we're going to say it's going to reduce the time required to create these reports by 70%. Now we've been customer first. We're telling them what they get out of it. We're being responsive to their need for efficient project scheduling, and we're giving them a strength and a proof point of this increases it by 70%. So these are just ways that you can take a sentence that you already have really great content, you're already addressing a requirement, and you're doing a good job of selling yourself, and make it more responsive and compelling for your evaluator. So another really great way to incorporate these, especially during a review cycle, is to make sure that you're always using your features and benefits. So the easiest way to do this is to apply the IFBP method. So this is where you take a train of thought of issues, feature, benefit, and proof. So this is used to identify at least one unique feature of your company and then substantiate what it means to the customer. And this is going to be the easiest way for you to take any aspect of your approach and make sure that it is being responsive and being compelling. So an issue, this is customer focused. What does the customer care about? What are their motivators? What are their hot buttons? What are they concerned about? What keeps them up at night? These may be evident in the RFP or RFQ, like they may specifically come out and give you a requirement that tells you what they're scared of. But ideally, this is going to be where you get that responsive capture information, where you have customer familiarity, or maybe your teaming partner knows what goes on in the environment, and that'll give you an advantage of knowing what these issues are. So your issues are always customer focused. And then once you know what that issue is, you are going to determine what feature your company can provide that's going to address that issue. So these are always about you, your company. So what is the specific tactic or aspect of your solution or your team maybe, or your approach that addresses this issue that the customer cares about? So this could be your locality, your experience, maybe you have software, proprietary software in the environment that addresses one of their issues. So this is how we are solving a customer's problem. And the most important thing about features is you never want to have a feature without your benefit. So you can give customers features all day long, but they don't care unless they get something out of it, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that the customer feels like they are getting a benefit from the feature. So this is what presents the specific value or gain that our customer is getting from the feature. So they're buying the benefit, they're not buying the feature. So these are always going to be about the customer. So this might be that it reduces cost, or it improves quality, or it shortens schedule. So those are what we want to talk about when we're conveying benefits. And just an easy way to think about it, because it's very easy in proposals, you'll see it all the time where people kind of switch up what is a feature, what is a benefit. So the easiest way to think about it is a feature is what describes what you're actually getting. A benefit is why that thing is important. So for example, if we were purchasing an umbrella, if it has a durable handle, that's the feature. That's about the umbrella, right? But why do I care about it? It's going to save me money on replacing weak or broken umbrellas. So that's the benefit. So always make sure anytime that you present a feature, you also present a benefit, because the customer is buying the benefit, not the feature. And then the last step of this is to give them proof. So we can sit and say all day, well, we can do this and we can do this and we can do this. But the customer is going to say, okay, well, prove it, right? So proof is evidence that a benefit has been provided to either this customer or another customer before. So this could be previously successful contract performance metrics if you have tangible or measurable examples of your features and benefits being delivered. These are always made stronger by metrics. So if you have a cost figure or a percentage or a number, those are always going to make your proof points even stronger. So effective proof points are going to establish your credibility and back up your features that you've claimed in your approach. So layering your proof points makes them compelling. So in other words, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them, right? So we do this really well. Here's where we did it really well before. Here's what they said about how well we did it. And here's a metric about what that status was improved upon, right? So we are now layering how well we did this thing in the past to show them that we are layering our proof points and making us even more compelling. A great way to make sure your proof points stand out is to use call out boxes, use sidebars, make sure that you are drawing the attention to that proof point so that it's easy for the evaluator to go through and find where we are calling out our experience. Some types of proof point data that you might want to use are metrics, if you have ratings from previous contracts, if you have kudos from previous contracting officers, maybe where you did a really great job, you might want to put a quote box somewhere in your proposal. And then if your company has any certifications or awards that are applicable to the work being done, those are other good things to use for proof point data. So IFBP is always most easily used during contract or proposal development. However, you can also use IFBP during any editing phase by ensuring that everywhere in your proposal has logical and consistent flow by starting anywhere in the issues, features, benefits, proof chain and working your way through the other steps. So if I'm a reviewer and I'm looking through a document and I say, oh, well, that's a feature, I know that that's a feature of our company, and then I'm looking through the rest of it, I'm going to say, okay, well, what issue are we addressing for this feature, right? Why does the customer care about it? And then I'm going to work forward and I'm going to say, well, okay, so we've given them a feature. What is the benefit that they're getting? Do we make sure that we tell them about the benefit? And then do we prove that? Do we have a proof point where we have now backed up what we're giving them and what we're selling them? And then, you could work all the way backwards. Say we have a call out box and we've given them a great proof point. Awesome. Does it make sense to the evaluator, or are they going to be reading through and they're going to say, well, where did this proof point come from, right? So work backwards. What benefit does this proof point tell us about? What feature of our company is this benefit coming from? And then what issue, why are we giving them this feature, right? So anytime you're reviewing, always make sure that if you find any part of IFBP in the document, you find all the rest of the parts too. And that's going to make sure that you have a train of approach narrative that is getting compelling and responsive content at every single step of your proposal. So another really important thing to remember, especially when it comes to making sure your content is compelling, is to know the difference between a differentiator and a discriminator. So these can often be mixed up a little bit when people are talking about building out their company's approach to a proposal. So this could be something about how you do the work, how you manage the work, special tools, the people you provide. And a differentiator means that you differ from the competition. It helps you stand out, right? But other companies might also have that differentiator. So it's not unique to you. So for example, you might have proximity to the customer, but other competitors might also have that same proximity, right? So you want to definitely use differentiators as much as possible because they are going to strengthen your proposal. But you really want to find, in order to get that compelling content, is your discriminators. And your discriminators live where it's important, the customer cares about it, and it's unique to your company. So your competitors can't claim the same discriminator as you. So these should be your key sales point, and they should be incorporated into your win themes. And you should try and have at least one truly unique discriminator that you are weaving into your compelling content. And this is just the easiest way to think about if you can't figure out what your discriminator is or what your differentiators are. If you're trying to figure out if it's a differentiator or discriminator, the easiest way to think about it is this Venn diagram. So if it's something that your competitor can offer and you can offer, it's neutral, right? So the customer needs it, It's something that, but it's something everyone can offer. If it's something your competitor offers and your customer needs and you can't offer it, that's a weakness. And we want to make sure that we are addressing those weakness gaps and we know about them so we can talk knowledgeably to them in our proposal. And if we do have a really big gap, find other ways where we can address that in our approach. And then your discriminators are going to live where things that your company can offer and the customer needs, but your competitor doesn't have. Those are going to be your strengths. Those are going to be your win themes. And those are going to be your key sales points that you want to make sure that you are incorporating into your content in order to get that maximum compelling evaluation. So ghosting, the competition, which I was asked about earlier. So ghosting, if you're not aware of this, is the act of calling attention to an unnamed competitor's weakness by highlighting the importance of your approach and solutions. So ghosting is a really easy way for you to weave into existing narrative places where you have a known discriminator. So this could be customer experience, customer knowledge, knowledge in the environment, proprietary software. If you know it's a discriminator for you, it's going to be the easiest thing for you to do to just real quickly put a ghosting statement into your proposal. And that's going to add a lot of compelling points to your evaluation. So IFBP is a great way to identify potential areas. Is there a benefit to your proposal that other competitors won't be able to match? And then you can just go through that IFBP process and develop a really strong ghosting sentence. So here's an example of how to think about it. So for example, if we were the incumbent and we know that there's inherent risk in a customer transitioning to a new vendor, we could totally ghost them on that and say, transition to a new customer, is going to expose higher risk of operations, and we offer seamless transition. We're calling out every single other person as our competitor as a weakness that we can now discriminate because we as the incumbent have this strength, and we can tell the customer exactly what benefit this strength gives them when it comes to meeting their needs and requirements. That's ghosting. So main takeaways when it comes to responsive and compelling content. So use your building blocks. Compliant, responsive, compelling should always be how you're thinking through building and developing these parts of your narrative. Don't edit in a vacuum. So always remember your win themes, your capture material, your consistency. Always make sure that you are evaluating every sentence for value. So does it add compliance? Does it add responsiveness? Is it compelling? If it's none of those three things, take it out. Replace it with something better. Replace it with something stronger that's going to give you evaluation points. Ensure consistency. Use your wall of truth and keep it updated, especially if you're managing a proposal. If you are the one in charge of that wall of truth, make sure you're always going back and double checking that you haven't made any changes to that wall of truth that may need to be updated so all of your authors can stay on the same page. Stay customer focused. So make sure that you're using those customer-centric, customer-first sentences. You're using their terminology, and you are meeting them at their level when it comes to discussing your approach and using words that they understand and that they are familiar with. And then using that IFBP method to establish logical flow through your responsive and compelling narrative, and then making sure that you know the difference between your differentiators and discriminators, and that you are using them to make yourself as compelling as possible, and finding areas where you can use discriminators to develop ghosting into your narrative. So those are my tips on adding responsive and compellingness. As Bhaskar said, it is now Q&A time.
Perfect, Kelsey. That was good. This is one of the quietest audience chat. I think people were so absorbed in your talk. Normally we have so I'm sure it will come at the right time. Yeah, we have questions coming in. So I'll maybe start with it, Kelsey. I think very comprehensive. Thank you. Kelsey, when you talk about compliant, compelling, responsive proposals, what is the advantages of one person doing all three? And what's the disadvantages of the same person doing all three?
Sure, no, that's a good question. So the advantage of doing all three is that you can make sure that you're remaining consistent in your messaging, and that you know everywhere you're being responsive, you can also address that compellingness. The disadvantage is that the best person might not always be, or one person might not always be the best person to address every aspect of this. So for example, your capture manager may know everything there is to know about your customer, and they're going to be your best resource to make sure that your proposal is responsive. But your technical SME, your subject matter expert, might be the one who's most familiar with your approach, and they might be the best person to add compelling content and make sure that you're really doing your best to sell your strengths and your benefits to the customer. So working together and finding where each person's best knowledge lies is actually your best way to make sure that you're getting the most bang for your buck on responsive and compelling content.
Nice, Kelsey, well done. It's about knowing your own ability of whether you have that all-round capability or you know your team, but that's brilliant. So questions are coming in. Let me talk through the questions. From Victoria, do you have suggestion of messaging around the client is asking about, but my company might not have exact experience, but something very relatable?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is where you might want to either at the very beginning of your proposal content, this is somewhere where you can maybe massage a strategic question. So if you knows what they're asking for, you might be able to ask them a question to kind of guide them to also accept your similar experience or your relatable experience in the Q&A. If that's not an option, or we're past the Q&A already, or maybe they didn't answer the way you wanted to, you can always still use proof points to highlight the feature and the benefit of the relatable experience, even if it's not the exact experience. If it's meeting the same issue, you can focus on what the customer is actually caring about and what they're asking for by presenting how you would resolve those things in the experience that you do have, even if it's not the exact same experience that the customer is looking for.
Thank you, Kelsey. Hope that was useful, Victoria. Kelsey, in the slide on compelling, you stated the importance of linking win themes to proposal. The proposals I have worked where I have had 2 to 3 weeks to handle the proposal process. Do you have best practices on how to communicate the importance of this step to my proposal team?
Yes, absolutely. So that is a great question. And I have also managed many proposals where, it's a week, 2 weeks tops, and the backbone of proposal development is always the first thing to go when you get to a tight timeline. So the most important thing is to make sure in that kickoff meeting that you have an idea already of what you want that approach to be. And while you have everyone there in your kickoff meeting, address where you think your win themes might be. And you can start development of a win theme and kind of tweak it and make it more precise as you go through. But at least getting that baseline of where you want your sales point to be or what your discriminator is should be established during that kickoff meeting, or in a smaller meeting of maybe just the manager and the capture, maybe just your proposal, your capture manager, and your SME. And maybe those are the people that you need in the room to think of that sale point. And once you get that sale point or your discriminator, then you can build your win theme off of that and share it with the rest of your team. So it doesn't need to be your final polished, end all be all version of your win theme at the beginning. As long as you have an idea of what you're trying to get across to the customer, you can tweak it and make it a little bit more refined as you go through the process.
Nice. Thank you, Kelsey. Hope that was useful, Rita. Mandy is asking if your proposal would look better in a graphic, but you cannot include all info due to page limit, would you always just go with the text?
So I would say yes, because while it would look better in a graphic, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we are giving our evaluator the information they need to make a good judgment on what we are providing them. So even if we know that it would look amazing in a graphic, if we can't get all the information that they need to the hands of the evaluator, we want to defer to the option that's going to be able to get all of the information into the evaluation process. So I would say text in that case, just because it's more important for them to know what you're offering than it is for it to look good in all scenarios.
Perfect. Thank you. Hope it was useful, Mandy. Victoria is just asking, do you like peer reviews?
So I do like peer reviews, actually, both conducting and receiving them. I think it is a great way when you receive a peer review, I think it's a great way to keep yourself humble, especially if you're someone who, day in, day out is constantly writing proposals. It can be very easy to slip into proposal language, right? We all know the same way that we phrase things and how we say things. So peer review is a really great way to both help others and help yourself pull out of that rut of writing in proposal language and make sure that you're still writing in a way that's easy to read and easy to evaluate.
Right. Rita is the curious one, I think, in the group, but please have the questions coming along because we will have the Scribble Quest shortly. Have you worked with the proposal software that the software creates that compliance matrix for the proposal automatically? What's your comments on the accuracy of those things?
Yes. So I have not personally used the software, but I have worked on proposals where the software was used to develop our compliance matrix. I would say its accuracy, depending on how the solicitation is put together, I would say that the accuracy of it is probably somewhere about 80%. So actually pretty good. I always give those a sanity check, mostly just to make sure that when it comes to translating that compliance matrix into headings that I'm then going to put into my outline for my proposal, that those flow logically as well. Because there's a lot of places where the software, it doesn't know that it's eventually going to be making it into a proposal. It's just trying to check all the boxes that are in the solicitation. So it might organize things according to how it's broken down in solicitation, but that might not always be the most logical way for it to be organized according to the proposal. So I'll always go back and double check just to make sure that, the section L and M flows to whatever section C is in there, or, the statement of work, because when I go to actually move that compliance matrix into my proposal outline, I'm going to want to make sure that I don't have random information flying all over the place that doesn't really fit into where I want it to be in the document.
Thank you, Kelsey. Kelsey, what if we are not compliant in a proposal? How to articulate the message explicitly, not saying that we are not compliant, but in your experience, how do you position that in a proposal?
You mean after award or before award?
Like while doing a tender, you just evaluated the requirements and you find that some sections you are not compliant. What's the best way of writing rather than to say, no, we are not compliant, which you're disqualified? What do you think from your experience? What would be the best way of responding to that sort of sections?
Sure, yeah. So the best way, if you're reviewing and you notice somewhere that you're not compliant, the best thing to do is to find exactly what about it makes it non-compliant. So whether it's a sentence or a line or whatever it is in the solicitation that you're not addressing. And the easiest way is to just put that whole line into the document. Even if it doesn't fit yet, that's fine. But put it into the document so you know exactly what needs to be added, and then work around it and massage it into the rest of your content so it fits.
Right. Any last questions to Kelsey before we begin the Scribble Quest? Right. Let me open the Scribble Quest. Let's see who are the attentive ones here. So are we ready? As you know, 3 questions from the webinar. Whoever answers first, we always give points to people who answer regardless. And then the winner gets a workshop, but the points get accumulated into Amazon vouchers, or gradually it gets accumulated into some cool stuff like the iPads, iPods, and bits and pieces. So let's begin. The question number 1. Kelsey talked about 3 things today, but she mentioned one thing wins the proposal. What's the thing? What wins the proposal? My God, that's a healthy competition there. Nice, Jess, Heidi, Holly, Nicole. Good. It's compelling, compelling. Nice, good try, good try. I think everybody who tried got the answers. We give a point, but Jess, I think you edged Heidi. But I'll give to all three, you, Heidi, and Holly. Fine. Next question. In the example that Kelsey gave us, she gave a transition. How long was the transition in that example? My God. The same three again. So yeah, Nicole.
Jesse and Holly are on top of it.
Yeah.
They were ready for this.
Nice. That's it. Keep going. I just want to keep it simple. So Kelsey mentioned create a dash for commonly used terminology. What was that thing Kelsey requested us to create for commonly used terminology? How is it even possible? By the way, I didn't share the questions already to Jess and Holly. I'm telling you, they are winning every single thing here. But thank you. I think that's the wall of truth. Yeah, thanks to everybody who joined in. Let's go, because we have some more time. Let's have a little bit more fun. What does IFBP stand for? IFBP. Do you actually type this fast without any error?
Those are very fast typers.
My God, everybody. Well, thank you. I think, Heidi, Mandy, Victoria, Terry, Rebecca, Jess, Manish, well done. There was one statement which I really loved in what Kelsey said, because obviously I always look for quotes in anything. In passing, Kelsey said a beautiful word, which is just because it's a dash word doesn't mean it's a dash word. What's that dot word and a dot word? This is a tough one. She just said in passing, just because it's the B word doesn't mean it's a B word. I'm just giving you an example. It starts with B. No, you guys are still so much into subject. Okay, I want this one at last. Kelsey, do you want to say that in your own words?
I don't know if I remember what it is.
Yes, you said just because it's a bigger word doesn't mean.
Oh, yes. Bigger words does not mean better words.
Correct. I think that's a popular one, right? I think obviously we'd love to add that one insight. I really like that statement. So again, 5 questions. Good try, all good try. Well done. Again, I will look at the points and I'll add it. As I mentioned, any questions to Kelsey? We still have 2-3 minutes left. While you do that, let me rewind again. This webinar will be available on demand for the next 2 days. Share that link. You could re-listen. But the slides and resources emailed out in 48 hours. After 5 days, it will be uploaded. We do 4 webinars a week, 4 webinars a month, 8 podcasts a week. The kinds of costs are $7,000, but we just only do it just because we just want to share the message. So if you like, share in social media, give us your feedback, come out as guests, talk to us, and that's about it. So thanks again for joining the webinar and sharing all your love and support. Thank you to you, Kelsey, for joining and sharing.
Thank you.
Next week, 31st March, we have Tara Kwake. Tara will be sharing B2B, business to business, how to win with less time, followed by Angie talking about proposal apocalypse, a guide on how and why to hire a consultant. So all the lists will be in our live workshop. As you know, you all are familiar, you all come in every week. So that's the link you could have. But as I mentioned, share your feedback if there is anything that we could do to improve. Thanks for tuning in. Slides and resources will be emailed out to you. And on this note, just today, half an hour ago, I came to know that we have assisted our 1,500th person towards the APMP certification. So this, I thought I'll share that to you as our favorite team here. So yeah, that's 1,500 in like 2.5 years. So in that list, you will also find our APMP list as well. Drop by a note if you want to do that. Happy to host you inside. Otherwise, I'll see you next week with Tara. Thank you again for joining. Thank you for sharing, Kelsey, and stay healthy all, stay happy, and I'll see you very soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.